From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
Bill, I want to just talk a little bit about some of the people you created new interviews with for this show. So this isn't, just archival tapes that are being presented. You spoke to people who were there. You spoke to people who are still living, who have stories to tell. And in episode 2, you speak with Rev James Lawson. And I just want to hear in your words, what are some of the strange things that occurred right before Martin Luther King was assassinated?
Yeah. I talked to Reverend Lawson. He is one of the giants in the civil rights movement. He would, John Lewis, we lost this year. Reverend Lawson was the mentor for John Lewis, and he organized the lunch counter sit-ins in Nashville, and he was one of the founders of SNCC. He was a good friend of Martin Luther King, and he was the one who brought King to Memphis to help with the sanitation strike, and he was there, and after King was killed, he went around the city trying to calm the black populations because he just didn't want to see more riots. And he also got 3 days after King was killed, he got a package in the mail that had a bullet taped to a card that said, "We have one of these for you too, N-word preacher." I assume that James Earl Ray, on his flight to Canada or something, didn't have time to send a bullet to James Lawson. When I talked to Lawson, he spoke of a number of things that really bothered him, that he noticed either before the murder or after the murder. And, one of them was that there were 2 firemen in the firehouse across the street from the Lorraine Motel. Those 2 firemen were told the day before the murder to report to different fire stations, so they were gone. There was Ed Reddit, who was a police detective who was surveilling King at Lorraine. It wasn't a nice job. It wasn't that he was protecting King. He was just keeping a list of who was coming and going, and it was his job because he was black and he knew who those people were. So that's why he was doing it. 2 hours before the murder, he is told to go home, ordered to go home on a trumped up charge. The thing I think Lawson was most angry about was that when King came to the city and other times, he had an all black police security unit assigned to him, an 8 or 9 man unit who guarded him day and night. And for some reason, on his last visit, that unit was not called to form. And we have Captain Jerry Williams on tape telling us that, that last time he came in, I don't know why, but we weren't told to form. And so King was stripped of his black security guard. There was briefly a 4-man all-white security guard sent to the Lorraine, but they went home at 5 o'clock, weren't replaced, and they didn't come back the next day, which was the day King was killed. Now, all that stuff doesn't prove that King was killed by a conspiracy, but it don't look good. And if it was table setting for a murder, then the finger of guilt has to point back to the people with the power to make those things happen. I mean, it's just as simple as that. So, and there were a bunch of things. There was Carthel Whedon, who was the head of the firehouse, who testified later on that day a pair of guys with fancy IDs, flashing Army IDs, asked to have access to the roof of the firehouse. And Whedon brought them up to the roof of the firehouse and let them go there. And he was pretty sure they didn't have rifles, but what they did have with them was photographic equipment. And they were there photographing the Lorraine motel, and the environs around there on what just happened to be the day that Martin Luther King was shot. And Bill Pepper's theory is that they were photographing that. So, and looking at the photographs, if they saw anybody who saw something that they didn't want seen, they would know, who it was, and they would have a record. So, but anyway, those people have never come forward. They never came forward and say, "Oh yeah, we were the photographers that day," which is highly suspicious. So there was a lot of stuff, and it certainly couldn't be James Earl Ray arranging these things, because he just drifts into town in the middle of the afternoon, and somehow at 6 o'clock he's able to pull off this elaborate murder.
And this is these are just exercises in scratching the surface of the problems with the official story. And there is exclusivity in the MLK tapes. We're learning in this journey that you're taking us on, Bill, we're learning not just the existing discrepancies that people have been aware of, in some cases for decades, but we're learning new information along the way. And this is something, Matt, you said just as much when you said, I thought Raoul was made up. And candidly, for a long time, I thought the same, because there is a, we don't want to spoil too much, but there are moments where it seems that because James Earl Ray is an unreliable narrator at times, a lot of what he says has to necessarily be scrutinized. And with this idea of scrutiny, I have one big question that I'd love to hear the answer for in your own words, Bill. What does the MLK tapes, what does this investigation and the events that it covers, what do they teach us in the modern day? What are lessons people can take away from this assassination that, honestly, many, many people in the U.S. consider unsolved today?
Well, there's a song in Porgy and Bess by Gershwin. It's "It Ain't Necessarily So," and the things that you're liable to read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so. And I would say that's the takeaway. That it's important to look behind, to pay attention to the details when things happen, and if you're going to be fooled by the things that they just sort of throw out there for you, you're going to be fooled a lot of times. So, just be on guard. And, especially with the internet these days, there's a lot of stuff out there that isn't true. And it's, it can be hard to pick through it and know what's real and what isn't.
I was going to ask do you have any advice on that realm? Because that's really what we try and do on this show, is sift through the stuff, the actual small truths that exist within the noise. But you've been doing this for a long time, Bill. Is there any trick to it?
No, there's no trick to it. There's, in fact, I'm not very good at it, because this whole internet thing is, brand new to me. When I was growing up, and you want to make a telephone call, you didn't dial, you didn't punch any numbers, you just told the operator the number you wanted to call, and then she, I mean,
But I think what Matt's asking too is like beyond the technology. I mean, it's about sort of like a frame of mind, like when you're approaching these types of stories. Like, is there anything that you have learned over the years as to how to kind of clear your mind so that you can not be influenced by all the noise? Or is it just something that kind of you learn just through experience?
There's a role for common sense to play. And you guys were relating to it before. You're just saying, gee, this guy, Ray, he's a bungler and all this stuff, and somehow, and that was, I mentioned before that I listened to King's speech at the Riverside Church on Vietnam, and it was so powerful and so intelligent, with such moral authority. And then I thought, and this bumbler James Earl Ray was the one who killed him? Those things just didn't go together. It's like, no, he was killed for an important reason, and the important reason was the power of his words. And it wasn't because some guy that grew up in southern Indiana just hated black people so much that he had to kill King. It's so I guess the answer to that, your question, is some amount of common sense goes a long way.
But wouldn't you say, though, oftentimes isn't a profound reason that important people are killed. I mean, like, look at John Lennon. He was killed by a crazed fan, I mean, or sometimes people just get killed by crazy people. I mean, I understand in this situation, I do not think that's what's happening, but how do you kind of reconcile those things and not be influenced, or not be overly looking for profoundness where maybe none exists in other types of cases, maybe?
Oh, I'm not so sure that John Lennon wasn't murdered by someone other than just a crazy guy. And the same thing with Allard Lowenstein, who was a congressman in New York and who was looking into the Bobby Kennedy murder. And some guy shows up and shoots him. And I worked enough in the Sirhan case that there were people at that time. There were federal programs where they were looking how to create robot assassins. It's known. It did happen. MK Ultra, and so if you can work on people and mess around with their mind enough to you're going to go shoot John Lennon. And John Lennon was not a popular guy for the official people. They were trying to get rid of him for years.
Sure.
So I don't know what happened there. I have no special knowledge of that. But when something happens like that, I don't automatically think, oh, it's just some crazy guy, because we have too many murders by just some crazy guy. And from what I know, a bunch of them, they're phony official stories.
Yeah, and we've already thrown out a couple of things that are going to send people down a rabbit hole today. Dennis Sweeney, who was the trigger man, right, for Lowenstein. Sirhan, as we've mentioned earlier, is also technically up for parole as we record today. History continues even after the headlines have left the newspapers and the evening news. And that's one of the things that is crucial to remember. As colleagues and listeners and fans of the show, Bill, we're hoping maybe you could just give us a quick laundry list of some of the other characters that people will meet in the course of the MLK tapes.
Oh, golly gee. One of my favorites is just coming up, and that's Art Haynes Jr., who was James Earl Ray's first attorney, along with his father. A smart guy, a really, really, really smart guy. He went to Princeton, graduated from law school, and he's out of law school for 2 months, and all of a sudden he is representing the man accused of killing Martin Luther King. I mean, his head must have been spinning. But he just gave us a really great interview in Birmingham, and he's still practicing law to this day. And he's a man of great conscience, and he was a judge in Alabama for 20 years, and he was appointed by George Wallace. He is not a flaming liberal by any means, and not at all. But he loves the law, and he loves the truth. He respects the truth, and he's not afraid to speak out about what he saw as James Earl Ray's attorney and what he discovered. And he's got a great sense of humor, and he tells a really good story. So there's a bunch of funny stories that he tells that I love. Anyway, he's one of the people that is coming up. We got Judge Joe Brown, who had his own TV show for 15 or 16 years. But before he was a TV judge, he was a real judge in Tennessee. And Pepper's attempt to reopen the James Earl Ray case landed in his courtroom. And it bounced around there for a year and a half or 2 years. It was a very messy thing. But Joe Brown is a ballistics expert, a gun lover. And he had a chance to look at the case and examine the gun and the evidence around the gun, the ballistics and the bullets. And he is utterly convinced that the throwdown weapon, the weapon that had Ray's fingerprints on it, was not the murder weapon. And he's a funny guy. I mean, he's got a great sense of humor also, and tells wonderful stories about what it was like to be black in the legal system in the early days in Memphis. So there's Joe Brown. Um, Gosh, it goes on. There's Glenda Grabo that comes along and tells an incredible story about Raoul, and the thing about that story that I love the most is that she also ended up working for Percy Foreman, Ray's so-called attorney, who also apparently knew Raoul. I mean, that's bizarre as can be.